Hi everybody, it's 314 React here. Today we're going to be looking at a bit of LEGO Builder's Journey, which is one of the best looking games ever. It has ray tracing on it, it's very hard to run. I'm running on an RTX 3090, it looks beautiful, ray traced everything, global illumination, ambient occlusion, reflections, shadows, everything. So let's dive in and have a look. So here we are on my latest level that I'm on. So it's kind of a puzzle game, very simple geometry, but it's so heavy to run just because all of the ray tracing that's present, and as you can see it looks borderline photorealistic here. From the video that Digital Foundry did, I think the reflections are ray traced to the point where there's so many rays that they don't even use a denoiser. Again, explains why it's so heavy. Here we're running at about 52 frames a second. The GPU utilization is locked at 99%. CPU utilization is only around 9-10%. And if we go into the option, you can see under here we're running at 4K, graphics quality set to high, ray tracing on, DLSS quality. I'm using the latest 2.210 DLL for DLSS there, which you can get from Tech Power Up. I'll put a link to that in the description. You can basically just swap out the DLL file and use different versions of DLSS. Here you can see everything that's done by the ray tracer. So shadows done by the ray tracing, reflections are done by the ray tracing, occlusions, global illumination done by the ray tracing. The whole thing can have ray tracing applied, and you can also flick all of the ray tracing off by flicking this button here. And we go back and we're now running at 66 frames a second. So even without ray tracing, it's still pretty heavy and it still looks really good. You can just see there's less accurate shadows. It's using screen space reflections, which still look really good, but they're just a little less accurate. Lighting's way less accurate. So let's put ray tracing back on, and there we are. You can see there's some grain there in the reflections, because despite the fact that it's running a really high ray count, it's still going to be a little bit messy now until they get like ray counts up into the millions or something crazy like that. Now, I was wondering, with DLSS on, it's actually rendering internally at low resolution. Probably the amount of rays are tied to that resolution. So if we turn DLSS off, it's now running at 4K instead of Quad HD, I think, being boosted up with DLSS, which may improve that ray count, which I thought may improve the grainy look of the reflections. And no, they're still a little bit grainy. So I imagine DLSS cleans up a lot of that anyway. I imagine the quality DLSS setting may actually increase the ray counts to make sure it's still getting like that 4K ray count. I'm not sure. But let's play a bit of the game here. See, look at the shadow just on that fire there, that emissive brick. Really accurate shadowing. Let's see what that shadowing is like without ray tracing. So that shadow's still there, it just seems much more inaccurate. Ray tracing back on. It's a really nice game as well, really nice music, really nice atmosphere. Wow, now this is lit really well. Okay, as we look around, there's still some slight odd artifacting around edges and stuff, despite the fact we run at 4K. There's still some odd stuff going on that you get even with DLSS off, I've noticed. Could be something to do with post-processing. Still like a bit of grain on those reflections, as I've mentioned, but overall it's basically looking like real Lego through your screen here. So we turn ray tracing off. You can see it still looks really good, borderline photoreal, but there's something missing, something not quite right, something your brain is telling you, and that is the sort of lack of accurate shadowing, the reflections that aren't quite right because it'll be using screen space. Screen space reflections don't have any depth values. When stuff's off screen it disappears. Like proper reflections here, you won't be able to see the reflection of this character in there because that part of them is not on the screen. Turn the ray tracing back on, and there we go, much more accurate reflections. As we move the camera around, you can see the reflections maintain, they don't disappear. If we turn DLSS off, let's run it raw 4K again, so down at 35 frames a second, and you know what, those rays do look less grainy. There's definitely less grain in those reflections. You can see even more when it's more well lit. So I think, yeah, running DLSS, because you're running a lower internal resolution and that has a lower ray count, you're going to get grainier images, unfortunately. So if we turn it back to quality, fairly certain I'm not imagining that. So this could be one of the games at the moment, and it could just be the new DLL that I'm using, but at the moment this game will look best with DLSS actually off, although it will absolutely crank that frame rate down. Usually DLSS makes things look a lot better, but in this case, it also seems the DLSS has some weird problems, like I said, with the post-processing. Like some of the chromatic aberration looked a bit excessive and a bit aliased with DLSS on. So we're going to run it with DLSS off for now, and we're about 35 frames a second. Which just goes to show you how ridiculously heavy this game is. I mean, this is like Quake 2 RTX, and that it's showing off what the future can be for games, where we'll be in a few years, when you can get this level of ray tracing on a game with the scale of Ghost Recon Breakpoint or something like that, and have it run performantly. It would just look absolutely beautiful. And yeah, pretty much photoreal, but at the moment it has to be, this level of ray tracing or path tracing has to be relegated to lower geometric detail like this in Quake 2 RTX. Because yeah, if you actually look at the amount that's actually been rendered here, it's not a lot. It's just this sort of area here, around here. Really enjoyable game as well. Just very peaceful. Which is good after playing a few hours of master levels on Doom. So that's with DLSS off. Let's flick the ray tracing off as well. And we're up to 46 frames a second. So even without the ray tracing, it's still so heavy. And yeah, this is where you can start to see, again, the limitations of rasterization. Can't see the reflection of that character properly. You can see a bit of it. Lighting looks a bit off. Lighting looks a bit fuzzy. There's a certain look the rasterization has, where it looks artificial. And this is where it really starts to show through. Because the actual textures are so nice and detailed. I mean, the little details on the bricks here, you know, like scratches and kind of fingerprints on them, as well as the general detail. But it's not quite there with rasterization. And again, we turn that ray tracing on, and the lighting completely changes. Looks so much more real, and those reflections that you don't necessarily consciously notice just really adds to that feel of it being real. Now, I imagine if you were to get this in virtual reality and have a really good control system, like a really flawless system where you can move the bricks around with your hands, you could actually have like virtual Lego, and if it looked like this or even better, yeah, that'd be incredible. Oh wow, here we go. Here's a bit more complexity, and here's where you see the frame rate dip even more, 27 frames a second. Just look at those water bricks as well. So you've not only got the reflections on the bricks, you've got the light behind it coming through, permeating. Let's mess around with the shadow here a bit as well. Look at that reflection of the brick. And the shadow moving around. Again, let's turn that ray tracer off. There we go, the scene definitely loses something. Shadows are just really inaccurate. Reflection's totally missing. The water bricks still look really good, but again, there's something not quite right. But the frame rate is up to 41. So you can run this in like low spec and DX11 mode. So it will run on anything, but in the absolute top end mode, DirectX 12 and ray tracing, it's extremely heavy. Let's turn that ray tracer back on. Let's turn on DLSS as well. Let's DLSS back up to quality. Again, some weird stuff around the edges of polygons there. Just looking a bit weird, grainy. Hopefully they find a way, maybe with the new ultra quality setting that's coming in DLSS 2, to increase that ray count to actually match the resolution that we're trying to get to. I imagine it's also because they don't use a denoiser, that probably doesn't help. It's odd, like I said, there's a lot of sort of lines along the side here we see aliasing. That's not something I've seen in DLSS 2 really. So I don't know whether it's just this game, the ray tracer, the post-processing, the DLSS off, and it's all just a lot sharper. So I think I'll definitely keep DLSS off for now. Like, there's just a part of your brain that gets tricked at this point into thinking that these are just real Lego bricks. It's the kind of level of graphics I've been waiting to kind of see for a long time. It's just very difficult to achieve. Ooh. Because yeah, for a long time I imagined this kind of level of realism, and it's that kind of midpoint where it's really close, so close to being photoreal, but not quite there just yet. Because there's still a few things that don't look quite right. But it's so close. And it's beautiful. It's a real step forward. Brings you back to playing Lego when younger, which is always good. Takes a while to get used to the brick placement system, but when you do, it's pretty smooth stuff. There we go. Like I said, in a few years when the technology's caught up and the hardware's caught up, imagine this, but like a whole world with infinite blocks. Just make whatever you want. in VR or otherwise. It'd just be beautiful, it'd be so good. Now that's cool. It's a really dreamlike feel to it as well. So you can see as the time of day is changing as well. I think Digital Foundry noted that there's like a sun in the sky, but there's also a couple of other backlights. Almost like, you know, sort of you're lighting up the area you're playing Lego in. So you can kind of see the time of day changing, but it's still lit with multiple light sources. Which is where that ray tracing really kicks in. Turn the ray tracer off here. And again, it still looks really good. There's something really artificial looking about that lighting. And it's throwing the illusion off. And the ray tracer back on. And there we go. It's the softness of the shadow as well. I think that's the other thing. Like the realistic softness of the shadow. The further away from the light source the shadow gets, the softer it is. And that's a really tough thing to emulate with rasterization. Like shadow numbra. Shadow numbra? Is that it? Yeah, stuff like that. So when the ray tracer just does it all for you on top of everything else. And of course, in the menu, if you flick it over to custom mode, you can adjust ray tracing for each individual thing. So you can switch off ray tracing for shadows if you want. Run screen space reflections for reflections overall. Ambient occlusion you can run in raster. And global illumination you can run in raster. So you can get a good mix. Of course, the best is just going to be mixing all of them together. You kind of see a preview here. It's kind of like got a Gaussian blur over it, but you can see how it's making those shadows much more accurate. You can even turn everything down to its lowest possible setting. Turn off ray tracing as well. And here you get 97 frames a second. And even at lowest graphical settings, it still looks pretty good. I mean, that's with everything down. See if the settings will go even lower. So you can actually set all this to off as well. So it's like, whoa, there you go, volumetric light. Look at the difference there. Wow, that's a big one. So there we go. That should be the lowest possible settings. Probably what you'll be getting on like a mobile phone or something. Again, that's maxing out my refresh rate. So that's the very bottom settings, everything off. Now if we go over to everything, full settings and ray traced. And there you go. So I think we've got the holy trinity of ray tracing games now. We've got Metro Exodus, Quake 2 RTX, and now Lego Builder's Journey. So excited to see what the future will bring with ray tracing. And DLSS as well. So yeah, I'll put a link in the description to the new DLLs for DLSS. Swap and change them out and see what new improvements they're bringing. They seem to be releasing quite a few at the moment. Like I've seen 2 or 3 DLLs come out the past month. So it's really cool to see the fast development of that. I've also seen a bit about AMD's FSR. I've given it a go on Terminator Resistance. It looks really good. I don't think it's possible for it to be as good as DLSS just by the fact that DLSS's machine learning aspect will enable it to be trained to get rid of certain things that you really don't want, like subpixel shimmering and weird stuff like that. But it does look good and it will run on any hardware. There's a game called Necromunda that has both FSR and DLSS now, I think. So I may get that and give that a try with both and do a comparison. But yeah, this is available now on Steam. It's really cool. If you've got the hardware to run it and you want to check out some ray tracing stuff, it's definitely worth it. I'll also link in the description of the Digital Foundry video, which goes into a lot more detail on this as well. It looks absolutely beautiful. So excited about ray tracing and where we're at with the technology, where we're going with the technology. It's come a long way since 2018, and it's certainly come a long way since I first saw Quake 3 ray traced on like a Pentium 4 multiple CPU server back in like 2003. Yeah, thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe and let me know if you want to see more videos like this, and I will see you in the next video.